Hello, and welcome to Zap the Gender Pay Gap, the podcast series where we expose the elephant in the room. The elephant's name, the gender pay gap. I am coming to you from Memphis, Tennessee, located on the banks of the mighty Mississippi River. Nestled in the southwest corner of the state, Memphis is home to the blues, barbecue, and so much more. I am your host, Gwendolyn Tucker.
Thank you so very much for joining me for this episode of The Gender Pay Gap. I am your host, Gwendolyn Tucker. May is International Victorious Women Month, and we will continue that conversation today. On last week's episode, I said that I don't want to stop at casting a bright spotlight on this elephant in the room, but I want to cast this elephant clean out of the territory. For those of you who have joined me on previous episodes, you know the elephant's name. For those of you who are new to my podcast, the elephant's name is the gender pay gap. In the event you don't recall the stats, the female to male earnings ratio has hovered between 80 to 83% since 2004, which means that for almost 20 years, the gender pay gap has hovered between 17 to 20%. In other words, women are earning 17 to 20% less than their male counterparts. It affects women in the workplace regardless of age, profession, or level within the organization. Now, you may be asking, so just how can I emerge victorious over this thing called the gender pay gap? This thing that manages to take a big chunk out of a woman's paycheck every single payday. It's not partial and it has no favorites. All women in the workplace are negatively impacted by it, some to a greater degree than others, but negatively impacted all the same. As far back as 2005, Dr. Evelyn Murphy estimated that a woman will lose between $700,000 and $2 million in her lifetime. In today's dollars, that equates to almost $943,000 of buying power on the low end and $3.1 million in purchasing power on the higher end. So this gender pay gap is managing to take away a lot of money from women in the workplace. Now, my goal is to show women how to be victorious and not stay trapped in the gender pay gap. Because when it comes to zapping the gender pay gap, what woman doesn't want to be victorious? Who doesn't want to earn equal pay for equal work? I know I do. Now, no one can pay you what you're worth. You're simply too valuable. But you know what? They can pay you what your contributions are worth. Who doesn't want a sizable raise that can put more money in your bank account? I host a webinar entitled How to Get a Raise in 90 Days. In it, I share the moves I made during my days in corporate that resulted in my base pay going up, up, up. But I also share a move you can make without relocating or taking on a new position or taking on more responsibility. You know what that move is? It's closing your gender pay gap. Do you remember the name of the book I shared on last week's episode? If you didn't listen yet, please take time to listen to it. The book is The Art of War by Sun Tzu. I'm actually holding my copy in my hands as I speak. The Art of War by Sun, S-U-N, Tzu, T-Z-U. If you haven't read the book, please do. Or if you'd like to hear a summary of it, check it out on YouTube. Going after what is rightfully yours will require taking calculated risk, which is a chance taken after careful consideration of the probable outcome. And the reason why I mentioned Sun Tzu is that he says it this way: ponder and deliberate before you make a move. Here's another quote from the book. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the results of 100 battles. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the results of 100 battles. When it comes to pay, your biggest enemy is this Goliath in the room named the gender pay gap. Now, you may be asking, so just how can I emerge victorious over this thing called the gender pay gap? I'm so very glad you asked. I did an 8-year stint as a career transition coach and was certified by the leading firm in the industry. My job was to coach dislocated workers on how to land their next best position. I literally worked with thousands of people over that 8-year period who often through no fault of their own was faced with a dilemma. They needed assistance finding their next job. I helped them create a career vision, write their resume, market themselves, prepare for interviews, and negotiate salary. For some, it was tempting to accept the first job offer and salary because some of my clients were in dire straits and were very desperate. But that does not describe you. If you are a woman in the workplace, you have a job. There's just a probability you're being underpaid compared to your male counterparts. I would venture to say a high probability that you're being underpaid. And so your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to find out if you're being underpaid, and if so, by how much. You will need to know a couple of things. You will need to know your job and pay grade, and you will also need to know the pay range for your job. And once you have that information, you will compare it to your base salary. So 3 things: your job and pay grade, your pay range for your job, and then of course, your salary and base salary that you're currently getting paid for your job. Now, I have spelled all of this out in my ebook, Underpaid, the number one challenge that women face in the workplace. I have laid it out step by step how to calculate where you are in your range. You can just click the link in the description box below. In my ebook, I discuss the state of pay for women in the workplace, the state of pay for women who lead in the workplace, because women who lead in the workplace experience a gender pay gap as well. And there's a section for you to determine your state of pay, plus a bonus section on how to close it. Now, I do have a personal ask of you. Will you please download the ebook? And if not for you, will you share it with a woman you care about who may be trapped in the gender pay gap? Because the first step in closing your gender pay gap is determining if you have one, and if so, how much it is. And the results of step 1 will help you determine your next step in closing your gender pay gap. Bottom line, I do not want you to be uninformed about the gender pay gap, nor do I want you to be uninformed about how to get out. I do hope you will join me next time as I disclose the next step you can take to emerge victorious over this elephant named the gender pay gap. Since you work so hard for your money, you might as well take home all of it. Thank you so very much for listening to today's episode. I look forward to seeing you next Wednesday at noon Central Standard Time for the next episode of Zap, the Gender Pay Gap. Until next time, be well.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Zap, the Gender Pay Gap. Please rate, review, and subscribe to or follow me wherever you get your favorite podcast. I am your host, Gwendolyn Tucker. Thanks so much for listening. See you next time.